Hey, read with me. Isaiah 53, verse 3. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Reading this verse, the first thing that's coming up for me is why was Jesus so acquainted with grief? I mean, yes, the Bible tells us that some of the people that Jesus knew died while he was on earth, but we don't see, for lack of better phrasing, forgive me, we don't see people dying left and right for him to have become so well acquainted with grief, so well versed in it. And then I remembered that though grief is commonly associated with the death of someone's physical body, with losing someone you love or that you have a deep affection for, grief is, in fact, not only about physical death. We grieve opportunities, we grieve hopes, dreams, friendships, and so many more things. Because grief is an emotion. Emotions are ways our bodies inform us about our internal states and about how the outside world is affecting us on the inside. So, emotions are sources of information. And what things like sadness, sorrow, and grief tell us is that we have either experienced a loss or we've been hurt in some way. From what I've read in the Bible, though Jesus might not have lost a whole heap of people through physical death, Jesus was still the same part of the Trinity of the Godhead who, out of a rich, deep love, left his throne in heaven to die for us. And while on earth, he was still confronted with sinners on a daily basis, and he was confronted with people who kept rejecting him. The Bible tells us that in Romans 6, verse 23, that the wages of sin is death. And so Jesus would have been very aware of that. And he would have been very aware that he was witnessing spiritual death all around him in so many interactions and so many conversations that he had. That's enough to grieve anyone. I love the quote, "What is grief if not love persevering?" Because you can't grieve something you never lost or never cared about losing, right? Even the phrase, "I miss you" in French is "tu me manques," which literally translates to "you are missing from me." And isn't that what grief is? The mourning of a loss, of something that is missing from you. And for a God who loves us so much that he is willing to take in all of our sin and shame, for a God who is love in nature, to be walking the earth basically with his heart in his hand saying, if you would just accept me, we could have the most amazing relationship and you'd be so much better off. I'd take such good care of you. Basically, this could be us, but you play it, basically. For a God who loves like that, to be rejected left and right on a daily basis, and not even only by his enemies, by his haters, because you can let some of the hateration slide if you know that it's coming from your enemies, because that's what enemies do, right? They hate on you. You come to expect it. But your own people? I'm thinking of the movie My Sister's Keeper, in which a couple are parents to a little girl, and the girl gets really sick. Now, I haven't seen the movie in a while, so some of the details might be a bit fuzzy, but from what I remember, their daughter gets sick. And they, of course, try operation after operation, medical trial after trial, and they keep needing donors for things like bone marrow, kidneys, blood, etc. And eventually, I believe, someone suggests that they have another baby because a sibling is more likely to be a donor match. This way, they don't have to stay on donor lists all the time. And at first, the parents reject the idea, but eventually they do end up having another child, also a daughter, to basically act as a ready to go donor for everything that the eldest daughter needs. Now, at some point after years, the youngest daughter grows up and she's providing all these things for her sister, the donor daughter, for lack of better words, just to make that distinction. But at some point, she's growing up and she just gets sick and tired of always being in hospitals and being poked and prodded and basically just existing to keep the eldest daughter alive. And so I believe in the movie, she ends up filing for medical emancipation of a minor at a very young age. This little girl was conceived to help, to even save her sister. But her parents, well, at least according to her, how it feels to her, they treat her poorly. They're overprotective because she can never get hurt. or she can never be away on a summer camp enjoying time with her friends. Because what if her sister ends up getting really sick again and she needs something in the hospital? If the youngest daughter is gone, there would be no donor. And so she felt as though she wasn't being treated like a human being, like an individual. And every time she would bring it up or she would want something for herself, her parents would reject her perspective. The reason why I'm thinking of this movie is because I think it's a good example of how you can show up for someone out of love, out of the goodness of your heart, and yet be rejected by them. In the movie, the little girl files for emancipation from her parents. She believed she was being treated so poorly by her parents that she wanted to opt out of the family. It is so deeply human to eventually break away from the things and the people who hurt us. But Jesus does the opposite because he's both human and God. He does the opposite. He persists. He goes harder. His love literally never fails. It never gives up, and it never runs out. If we, as flawed humans with a deep and intense natural desire to love and to be loved, to be accepted and belong, to be safe, are hurt by how people treat us, how people reject us, imagine the sorrow that Jesus, the God who is love, must have felt, must still feel when we reject him.